My name is Milou, and I've been working at FeedbackFruits for almost 2 years now. And before that, I studied philosophy, and there I really learned a lot about some of the main problems in the world. And it was really good to discuss with my fellow students in small groups. And I just really enjoyed all those discussions, interactions, and I thought that's really valuable. And I would love it if all students had that experience. So that's one of the reasons why I joined FeedbackFruits. And in FeedbackFruits, I've been working as a teacher relations specialist. So in that role, I've been working a lot with teachers, helping them get started with the tools, but also hearing a lot about some of the challenges that they're facing in education. And I'm currently part of the pilot success team. So I'm a pilot account manager. And in that role, I speak to a lot of different institutions worldwide who are planning on rolling out our tools and are on their way of becoming a partner of FeedbackFruits. And I really enjoy speaking to everyone there. And in FeedbackFruits, what we also sometimes do is having a FeedbackFruits university class. And I'm one of the teachers there. So what we do is that we really like to test out our own tools, but not just the technical testing, but actually testing them with content activities so that we can also learn what it actually is that students are experiencing when they work with FeedbackFruits and make sure that we can optimize their learning experience. And then I'm here together with Maria.
Hi, everyone. Like Milou already said, it's an honor to be here today presenting to all of you. So my name is Maria. I have a background in psychology, and I was also teaching at the university in academic skills and research methods. I really wanted to join FeedbackFruits because I saw a kind of lack of engagement and motivation in the students that I was teaching. And I really saw the potential of technology to help really make this better. So when I found FeedbackFruits, I was really motivated to join them and start working here. So that actually happened. And I started in the role of a pedagogy researcher. So really trying to understand the pedagogies that institutions are implementing worldwide and seeing how we can support those with technology. And now I'm moving into a more product management role. So also trying to see how we can basically shape the future of education and using technology to do that. And finally, I also designed and implemented the pedagogy onboarding at FeedbackFruits. So basically all newcomers in the company basically get up to date on the basics and pedagogy so that we can make sure that we really live up to our value at our company. So we also wanted to talk a little bit about why we wanted to have this session here today. One of the big misconceptions that we sometimes feel at FeedbackFruits is that we are seen as just one tool that can be implemented to foster feedback culture, one tool that can be implemented to foster interaction. We really want to be seen as more of a holistic tool suite, just so that students can actually follow a complete learning journey and really be put in the driver's seat of their own education. We also wanted to focus on a challenge that we hear a lot. Doing a lot of research and also Milou talking to a lot of teachers, we noticed a recurring challenge, and that was that of feedback literacy. So today we really wanted to host a session and try to share our thoughts on how technology can really help cultivate those feedback skills that are really important in our society today.
But before we dive into that, we have a little bit of overview of the session. So I will start with sharing a little bit what is the story behind FeedbackFruits and what is it that we're trying to achieve. And then we will talk, or Maria will talk a little bit more about the challenge of feedback literacy. And together we will show you a learning journey of how you can cultivate these feedback literacy skills with FeedbackFruits. And then Maria will close up with some of the future ambitions with regards of teaching these feedback literacy skills and the direction that FeedbackFruits wants to move into. Who is FeedbackFruits and who are we? The story behind FeedbackFruits is actually, as some of you might have already known, is that FeedbackFruits was founded by students in 2012, so 10 years ago this year. And these students, they just came out of high school, and then they really expected that university was the thing that they've been working towards their whole life. And then when they were there, they were actually a little bit disappointed in the teacher-centered learning. So having a large class, having the teacher doing most of the talking in front of the class, and not a lot of space for student interaction and discussion. So what they wanted to do is create a way of increasing student engagement and interaction throughout the course. By now, 10 years later, we also have around 80 employees, and we will collaborate with more than 100 institutions worldwide. So we're very proud to be part of that. And we're not just offering tools to engage or to increase student engagement and interaction, that's part of it. But by now our mission has become a bit more ambitious, because our mission is now to allow everyone, so every teacher, every learning designer, to create the learning activities that they would like to create, regardless of skill and context, and support them in the best way possible. And how do we want to achieve that? Well, what always drives us is that we say pedagogy over technology. So we do not need to reinvent the wheel, because there are already so many good learning activities out there that are currently not properly supported by technology. So our specialty is developing the technology, and we'll do that in collaboration with the institutions that we work with. So based on their input, we look at the pedagogy or the learning activity that they want to do, and then we will work on making it the best possible experience, both for the teacher and the students. So this is what brings us to today. We've developed a complete tool suite that can be divided into different categories, as you can see. So a lot of tools for feedback, activating study materials, but also some tools that can be used in the classroom. All these tools are integrated in the different learning management systems. As you will probably know, they will allow for a seamless integration in there. So now, before we dive into the feedback literacy, Maria will talk a little bit more about the value of peer feedback.
Yeah, so we hear a lot about feedback and how it can positively impact the learning experience of students. Before going into what feedback literacy really means, especially to us, we also wanted to go over some of the benefits that result of using feedback, especially peer feedback. So in general, it positively influences the learning process and motivation of students. This can also be due to the social nature of it, interacting with your peers, receiving feedback from them, and better understanding how your progress is going. But also for students, often giving feedback is actually more valuable than receiving it, because they are training their evaluative judgment skills. So they're learning how to evaluate work and compare it to a standard and see how that can also influence their own work. So when they read their own work, they can be more critical readers, being able to basically judge and be more critical of their own work themselves. It can also stimulate self-regulation. When students self-assess, they can currently see, where am I now? Based on the criteria from a rubric, for example, they can see what kind of behavior do I want to move towards? And then they can set actionable goals for how they're actually going to get there. And engaging in the self-regulatory cycle is essential for student learning and also student agency, really putting them in the driver's seat to formulate their own goals and formulate their own movement towards where they want to be. Peer feedback especially allows for more discussion between peers. When you get feedback from a teacher, it can be a bit intimidating. You don't want to ask back, why did you give me this feedback? Or what did you mean by this? But when it's your peer, they're often seen on the same level as you. That also means that peers may be more likely to interact with them, create a dialogue surrounding feedback. And that also allows for the feedback loop to be closed so that students can actually take action. So although feedback is a really, really positive thing, we hear a lot of challenges from teachers and from the research itself as well. What we often hear is, how can I make sure that my students are actually taking this process of giving feedback seriously? And how can I know if my students are actually giving quality feedback? And once we hear all these challenges, it often relates back to a main challenge that I think most educators worldwide face. And this is basically, how can we foster feedback literate students? Students come out of high school and they don't really have any training in receiving feedback. It can be a really, really scary thing, a quite intimidating thing, and also a very vulnerable experience. So how can we foster these students? Well, I want to begin by looking at a model. I always know that looking at a theoretical model can sometimes be a bit abstract, but I think that in this case, it can really lay the groundwork for what we mean. So there are four main elements for feedback literate student, or feedback literacy in general. It's being able to appreciate feedback, being able to make judgments about that feedback, managing the effect associated with it, and then finally taking action. So appreciating feedback could be understanding the role of feedback in improving your actual work, but also about how important it is for you to be an active learner in that process. It could also be using technology to revisit that feedback, reassess how you feel about it, how you could implement it, and also recognizing that it comes from many different sources and in many different formats. Making judgments could be developing those capacities that I mentioned, that evaluative judgment, being able to look at a paper, evaluate it against a certain set of behaviors or criteria, and also being able to make that judgment about other people's work so that you can provide them constructive feedback. It could also be just participating in peer feedback productively and making sure that once you do that more and more, you also become more comfortable with it. Finally, managing effect is a really important part that I believe is often underappreciated. It's that maintaining that emotional equilibrium. How do you avoid becoming defensive, especially when you receive critical feedback? How can you also encourage students to be proactive in soliciting feedback? Oftentimes we tell students, okay, well now it's time to get peer feedback, but also how can we put them in the driver's seat and how can we get them to actually ask for that feedback? And once they're asking for it, it's also about taking action. How do we actually also foster a mindset that it's good to respond to feedback? It's good to foster a dialogue around it. And it's also good to develop strategies to be able to actually implement it in improving the deliverable of your work, or implement it in, improving whatever it is that you are working with. But I also know that sometimes models can be quite abstract. But this is some of the main elements of what a feedback literacy could mean. But now we can also take a look at what could that actually mean in practice. So for example, as an instructor, also, it's really important to let students understand the why of feedback. Why are we actually doing this? I think we may believe that many students come to university knowing why we do feedback and what they can learn from it. But many times I think that students may be confused as to why are we actually doing this process. At the same time, it's also important to do multi-stage assignments. So a process involving, or a journey involving, a lot of different moments where students can actually receive different kinds of feedback, and not just have it be one moment in time and then they put it away and they never go back to it. Being able to work with models of work as well. So being able to see what is a good example of this work and what can I take from this, not using it as a copy, but understanding how that piece of work relates to what it is you are doing and the behavior that you were expected to show. That can really also make what you are actually working on much less abstract and a bit more tangible. It's also allowing there to be a space for dialogue, allowing there to be an in-class discussion, encouraging students to discuss the feedback and co-construct kind of a meaning of what that feedback actually means among themselves. And then it's also allowing for an opportunity to possibly close the feedback loops, encouraging students to talk to each other about what that feedback meant and how they actually need to implement it. Again, making things a little bit more tangible.
So then that brings us to how we can actually help cultivating feedback literacy skills, because as Maria mentioned, this can be a real challenge for teachers to foster these skills in students. So what we want to do is see how we as an edtech company can help in supporting these skills and in cultivating them throughout a course. So what we will do is we'll go into a learning journey with different moments in time where you can use different of our learning activities throughout the same course. But before we will dive into it, it's necessary to understand a little bit what the tools do that we will talk about. So we won't go into any detail, but we'll just give a brief overview. So one of the tools that we offer is the comprehension tool, which allows students to annotate a document based on predetermined topics by the teacher. So if you want them to focus on an article, they can make their annotations and they can link it, and they can also add their notes in it. Then we have a tool called Automated Feedback, which is powered by artificial intelligence, and it gives the students automated feedback on their work. So as a teacher, you can set up the criteria, and then the students can hand in their work and get feedback on the lower level feedback skills. So things like academic language, citations and reference, which really already helps to take away that first level of feedback. And then after that, what you can do is let the students give feedback on each other's work with peer review. So peer review is a tool that allows for online feedback. And as a teacher, you can set some criteria, and then the students take those into account while they're giving feedback on each other's deliverable. And then another tool that we have for giving feedback is assignment review. So it's actually similar to peer review, but the only difference here is that this is feedback from the instructor on the students, on their deliverables. So this is an opportunity for you to give inline feedback on students' work, such as an essay or maybe even a video. And then finally, we also have a tool for students to assess each other's skills. So this is group member evaluation, which can be used, for example, when students have been working on a group project together to get more insight into how the collaboration process went. So this is a little bit of an overview of the different tools that we will talk about. But before we will really dive into the learning journey, Maria will elaborate a little bit on why we wanted to have this learning journey.
Yeah, so as we mentioned in the beginning, there's often a misconception that we just have one tool, but what we really want to support is also a student learning experience or student learning journey. So here at FeedbackFruits, we created these learning journeys to try and show, basically the student's journey over time. The way that this works is basically we have two sides. The first side is during class. So those are more synchronous moments where students are in class together. That can also be via Zoom call, some in class, some in Zoom. And then there's outside of class moments. So mainly, asynchronous sessions. Now, this learning journey is not meant to be an all or nothing. It's not meant to be a thing where you have to implement everything or it doesn't work at all, but there's always stepping stones. And what we hope today is to start a conversation around feedback literacy and also around how we can use technology to do that. So if one segment stands out to you and you'd like to try that, that's great. If the whole thing stands out, that's also cool. Every context is different. Nothing is the same, right? So it's really about taking things from it that you appreciate or that you could imagine working for your context. Just wanted to say that first of all. So starting off with the feedback journey, as we mentioned previously, practice by reviewing exemplars can be a really tangible way for students to get better at understanding what's expected of them. So oftentimes we provide a rubric to students so that they can understand what behavior we expect of them or what we expect to see in their deliverable. But sometimes we use language that's not really clear to them and the whole concept kind of remains abstract. So by using comprehension, which is a tool to annotate, students can already practice using those criteria to give feedback. So as a teacher can upload a model piece of work, that could be, for example, a really good piece of work, and students can start annotating on that document how they feel about certain criteria, where they see that in the paper, and they can do that individually outside of class. Now, the cool thing is that then you can also basically use the analytics from this and you can combine them together. So it creates kind of a heat map overview where you can see where a lot of students commented on certain areas. Fostering a discussion around feedback is a really, really important aspect. So allowing that time in class for students to discuss how they felt about certain aspects of giving feedback, what they felt comfortable with, what they felt like they were a little bit in a depth with, can really foster feedback of culture among students where they also feel the ability to fail sometimes giving feedback, but also really be honest and vulnerable about what they find difficult or what they feel about the whole process in general.
So after having completed that first step, the students have hopefully by then created a better understanding of what's expected of them, and they can start working on their deliverable. And after students work on the first version, what they can do is then hand it in automated feedback. Like I just mentioned before, automated feedback gives students instant feedback on their writing skills. So what they can do is hand it in, and then the tool, within a few minutes, depending on the length of the paper, the tool will give some suggestions based on the academic language, but also whether they've used the citations correctly, whether the references are all well, but even on the content. So are all the sections that are required by the teacher, are they included? Are they long enough? So did you keep within the word limit? And also the structure. So it gives different type of feedback. And then once the students receive the feedback and they've read it, they can process it, and then they can improve their version. And if they want to, the really eager students, they can even hand it in again in automated feedback, and they can get some more feedback. So up and until they are satisfied with their work, they can work on it. And this really helps with practicing the more iterative mindset. Then when they are happy with what they got, they hand in their work in peer review in the next step. So as we mentioned, peer review really aims to help students develop a more critical reading develop more critical reading skills, and it will allow the students to give feedback. But first, before they give feedback to their peers, what you can enable, is optional, is a self-assessment. And if you let the students do the self-assessment, they will see the criteria that have been added, and then they will give feedback on their own work. And this really helps with the students with their with developing their self-evaluated skills, and then also help to understand what they can do better and where they're already doing a really good job. So after they finish the self-assessment, they get some work assigned, maybe from one peer or more, depending on the settings, and then they can start giving feedback. So again, they use these criteria, and they can write some comments to clarify the scores that they will give. And then we also offer some inbuilt writing tips for feedback. So while the students are writing their feedback comments, they can see a little tip pop up in the bottom that helps them focus a bit more on whether they're actually writing constructive feedback, and really helps them with training these feedback literacy skills. Then when all the feedback is written and received, the students will start with reading the feedback that they've received from others. And what's really cool is that they get one overview where they can see both the feedback they give to themselves in the self-assessment, and then compare this to the average received scores from others. So the students can immediately spot where they might have been a bit overconfident in themselves, or maybe they have been a bit underconfident. So this is where a lot of the learning happens. And of course, well, when you read the feedback, like Maria mentioned before, there can be a lot of discussion about the feedback. So it's very crucial for this feedback process to also have that interaction. So when the students are reading the feedback that they receive, they can reply to it and they can really have discussion about it. And then finally, when they're done with reading and discussing about the feedback, they can also rate the reviewer's feedback. So they can rate on a scale between 1 and 10 what they thought of it, how useful was the feedback, and they can even give a suggestion for maybe next time how to even improve the feedback, so that the student who receives the feedback also has a better understanding of why the student thought the feedback was useful or not.
Now, this might sound very meta, as we also write here, but another part is that, as Milou just mentioned, once you've received your feedback, so imagine Milou just gave me feedback, I was reading through her feedback, and I thought it was really valuable. She elaborated on why she thought certain things, she always included because, and she always framed it as her own perception. And I really want to acknowledge Milou for that. So I gave her a review on her feedback and I told her exactly this, but I also told her maybe next time she could include a few more examples. Now Milou actually has the ability to open this up and read the feedback on her feedback. So that's why we call it meta feedback. This also trains students not only in giving that feedback, but also being open to receiving sometimes constructive criticism on how they're actually giving feedback. And that can also make them again reflect not only is it including a self-regulatory cycle or setting goals for how they want to improve their deliverable or their content, but it's really also making them think about how do I want to improve on the way that I give feedback. So this is also something that's really important for this process of giving feedback. And then finally, there's also reflection. And reflection in itself is a super powerful tool. It's where a lot of the higher order thinking comes together. We already have a preset kind of condition or suggestions for how students can think about this based off of some research, but it's also just important for students to reflect also on the effective part. How do they find that process? How do they implement those changes? And just reflect on the process of that whole feedback learning journey for themselves, so that they can also really formalize the goals that they set for themselves on how they want to improve. And this reflection can then also be used in class. So once the feedback themes have been, once the feedback has been completed, the teacher can also see an overview of how students were rated in general. Where did they lie? Were they more in the higher end on some criteria? Were they in the lower end on some criteria? And they can really also talk about students, how was it receiving feedback, and highlighting that effective part to really develop that skill of managing that feedback, and also the ability to take action from it, not feeling that feedback really made me feel vulnerable and now I don't know what to do with it, but also opening up a space for students to help each other, say, hey, I got this feedback, but I'm not really sure how I could implement it. And using that in-class session to also capitalize on that, basically. Again, the students can iterate on a third version. Sometimes having an in-class discussion can actually really help solidify the changes that they want to make them think a little bit more in depth about, okay, Milou gave me that feedback. I wasn't really sure, but sometimes talking about it with others can really make that clear to students. So that's hopefully what will happen in that stage. And then finally, as we also mentioned, getting feedback from many different sources is also really important. So finally, the teacher can also give feedback on the student work. This again opens up for multiple phases of feedback from multiple sources, and also trains students in being able to handle feedback from multiple sources as well. And then finally, much like when researchers hand in peer or articles for journals, right? They also have to say, I received this feedback and this is how I changed it. I received this feedback, but I didn't decide to implement it because of this and this and this reason. It's a really powerful tool to also encourage students to do that, to actually make them think about why did they implement certain changes and why did they not implement other changes. This also really helps with that, closing that feedback loop and taking action and developing a strategy to actually be able to handle feedback and feel comfortable with it, and also feel comfortable in knowing how to implement it and when not to. So that's for now the final step of this learning journey that we kind of created. In general, we just think that this can really help students develop their evaluative judgment skills. It can help them develop that critical reading. It allows for multiple points of feedback, as well as that ability to really take action. I think this is something that can often feel quite intimidating. What do I actually do with this feedback and where do I go with it? Having this space of reflection, talking to your students, creating this feedback of culture, a social learning community where you learn from each other and co-construct meaning. I think this is a really, really powerful aspect. But of course, this is also only baby steps, right? I think that implementing a learning journey like this is not easy. It's not easy at all. And only certain elements might be relevant. And sometimes it's just not possible to have the resources to do all of this. But we at FeedbackFruits, we're also very ambitious, and we have a lot of future ambitions. We're often talking about vision and where we want to go. Milou and I were also talking a little bit about feedback literacy in general, but also where do we want to go from here, and where does FeedbackFruits also want to participate in this and really help. So for example, this could be centralized institution-wide frameworks or models that allows for scalable learning activities. It could be analytics for student journeys to see how students are doing. It could also be improving student autonomy in tools that use AI, and then also tracking, for example, meaningful competency development. These are some of the journeys and some of the areas that we are also looking at and excited about. But we hope that this learning journey in general gave some inspiration for how certain tools can be used, and also how certain features can really be capitalized on to develop some of these skills.
So then I think we will still have a little bit of time for questions later. But before we dive into those, we just wanted to point out some of our favorite resources. So as you might have already known, we have a YouTube channel with a lot of really cool videos. Our video team has been working really hard, especially the last few months. So we've released a lot of videos for different tools, how do they work, but also from the student experience. So if you want to learn more about the specific tools, I would really recommend you to go there and have a look, because during this session, of course, we didn't go into too much detail. Then we also have a lot of really cool ebooks on our website that help you with building engaging courses for students and have some really nice tips and tricks. We have the learning journeys. This was just one example. We're working on way more learning journeys with FeedbackFruits for different purposes. So if you're interested in that, then also keep an eye on the website. And we've also included a book here, and it's actually from the same author that also came up with the framework that Maria showed you earlier. If you're interested in also learning a bit more about how to design these feedback processes in higher education, then this is definitely a big recommendation from our side. And then if you want to learn a bit more about how to work with FeedbackFruits, on top of the YouTube videos, we also have a help center with a lot of articles where you can find all the information that you need, also step by step how to create a new activity. And then if you're working on that and you still need some additional help, we also are very proud of our support service, because we have our support chat that's available in each FeedbackFruits activity, but you can also just send us an email. The link is included in the slides that we'll share later. And they're available actually 24 hours on working days. So you can expect a reply within 5 minutes usually. And then we've also listed some of the references here, but we won't go into detail. They're just there for if you want to have a look. And then we would like to thank you all very much for joining our session today. We're just very honored that we had the opportunity to speak here. We would love to meet you afterwards also in the networking lounges if you're interested in talking a bit more with us. I think for now, let's open the floor if there are some questions. I haven't seen the chat, so maybe someone can.
Thank you both so much. I think there is one question, and the question is more around, what do you think should be one of the first steps to implement this learning journey? What is something that you would go first for in your experience with talking to some of the institutions?
Personally, I think a really strong point is also opening a dialogue with students surrounding feedback. I think that's always a first step. Maybe defining what to them feedback means and what to you that means, and how it can be helpful in their development. I think that's always an essential starting point. And it's also always starting slow. I think putting students into this learning journey straight away can be very intimidating. It's also defining and understanding where are students now and where do they want to go. Starting with slowly doing peer reviews in smaller scales, using anonymity as a scaffold also, so that students start to feel comfortable in giving that feedback to each other, and also doing it a few times so students can really get into that flow of how this works and what works for them. And then over time, again, keep on engaging in that dialogue and keep understanding when they're ready or how they're feeling about it. Then maybe anonymity can also be removed over time and more features can be added. From my perspective, I think that's what I would have to say about that. Anything you want to add, Milou?
I think I fully agree with what you've just said. I think our tips, and in my experience with working with teachers, is always start easy. So we have a lot of different features and you can add on different modules for different tools, but I think just keep it easy, try it out, even do a practice round maybe with your students when you're in the class, so that you know that you are sure that the students also understand how it works. And then like Maria said, I think practice makes perfect. So don't expect immediate results, but do it a couple of times, and then you'll definitely see the value of it.